Thank you for having a beautiful day.
Well, I thank you guys. Great. What about? So I entered the University of Maine at Orono back in 1977 as a 17-year-old, very young freshman who had spent most of my childhood traveling around to different Navy bases in the country. My dad was in the service, so we were very nomadic. The university was this incredible, enlightening thing where suddenly I was in a different world that was so much larger and so much more interesting. And I had entered as a anthropology major because what I wanted to do was knit together my interest in history and mythology and art and everything else like that. And I thought that whole thing about Egypt and anthropology and archaeology was like would knit them together perfectly and be a legitimate um, major that my parents could understand and that it would be something. But I found myself taking two art courses my first year, first semester, and then two more my second semester, and was spending all of my time in the basement of Carnegie Hall, making sculpture, drawing up in the painting studios. And by the end of the first year, I had sort of made my mind up and went home and told my parents, look, I'm going to switch. I'm still going to take some anthropology courses. Maybe that will help if I ever get a teaching degree. But I really want to be an art major. And my parents were a little, they were a little bit like, okay, because I'd been drawing since I was 6 years old. I had been the kid who always drew in class. And at one point, a teacher had taken all of my paper and pencils away from me because she felt I wasn't concentrating on the work. And my mom ended up going in and saying, what's going on? Mark said you took away his drawing materials. And she said, he's drawing too much. And she said, how are his grades? She's like, well, he's getting A's. So what's the problem? Because I had been going to the bathroom and getting toilet paper and drawing on toilet paper. So anyway, they weren't surprised that I wanted to go into art. But my dad just shook his head and he said, that's a hard road to hoe, boy. The life that I was being offered in that world, in the studios and in the art history courses, was just wonderful. It was so much more than reading dry history books or just that kind of thing, because suddenly it was about ideas and bringing those ideas into reality. I ended up leaving Maine and the University of Maine, rather, graduating in the 81, and feeling still like I wasn't ready for graduate school, even though I thought I want to go to graduate school someday. But right now I feel too young, too fresh. And I wanted to go to Europe. I had spent all of that time for 4 years looking at slides on a screen, and I thought, I want to go see the real art. So I worked for 18 months in Portland as a waiter and in an art supply store and as a secondary waiter, two different restaurants, and put all of my money in the bank and bought a Euro pass for a 3-month Euro pass and a whole wad of traveler's checks and a backpack at LL Bean and a one-way ticket to Athens. And in April, beginning of April, I flew to Athens with everything that I had and in the backpack, it seemed, and just wandered and saw everything I needed. Returning from my travels in Europe, I ended up deciding that I needed to not go straight back to graduate school, and I wanted to work for a while and see if I could take the skills that I had developed through 4 years of undergraduate and worked for a while to see if I could take them into the marketplace. So I did that, but I decided to get a job doing visual merchandising with a friend of mine who was also a painter and artist, and worked with him for a while doing windows of stores. And so I did it for a while, and it was interesting, but the temporariness of all that really bothered me. The fact that you worked your butt off on something, and 8 days later it's in the garbage can, and then you do it again. And it's fun to do that for a while, but after a year it became exhausting. Coming up with a new interesting idea only to throw it in the dumpster in a week was frustrating. And I had started to feel that it was time to go to graduate school. The University of Pennsylvania had a very strong sculpture and painting program, graduate program, with Bob Engman and Neil Welliver as the heads of those two respective divisions. When I sat down with Bob Engman and we started talking, he was the only one that sort of made sense to me, that was speaking about sculpture and about what I could do and talking about my work. And he wasn't even that flattering about my work when he saw my portfolio. He said, well, you're doing some work, some good work. I'm not sure I'd call it sculpture yet, but he says, I can see where you're going with this, and this is good. And so I ended up feeling that this is a person who could be a mentor, and indeed he did become my mentor in the course of 3 years of graduate work. Like, this is an idea I'm doing right now for it's a commission for a client. And yeah, it starts with me doodling, but I can doodle on pencil and on paper, on mail, but it immediately goes to me sketching in 3 dimensions. And I sketch with wire and tape, and I draw in space with the wire. And then the forms happen with the tape, which just gives me what I call a thumbnail. And sometimes there's boxes of these where I'll finish this and I'll throw it aside, and I'll start another one, I'll throw it aside, and I'll start another one, I'll throw it aside. Then I'll have this whole thing, and I'll go back through and I'll find which piece works and how the good parts that it works, and I'll blow it up to the next level. Frequently what ends up happening is, in the same way I'm sketching in space with wire, I sketch in space with this kind of wire, and then rather than using tape, I use this sort of material to kind of get the forms. This material is then covered with plaster. And as it's covered with the plaster, I start to build the surfaces and refine the edges and find the edges in space, find these sort of perfect lines to carry circles around where circles don't connect, or what I look at a lot is where's my eye stopping and why is it stopping there? Is it stopping there because I want it to, or is it stopping there because the line is wampus or the circle is sagging at that point? Is the thrust gone? The plaster, when it's finished, gets to be to this degree of finish. This is molded and goes to the foundry where we pull wax, I perfect the wax. The wax is then invested and burned out, and then molten bronze is poured into it. And then I get the bronze back, which I then proceed to finish and file and patina. At some point, I think in my career, I'm probably going to stop covering them with plaster, because as I make each piece, it becomes more and more refined. I like basically are weaving these things. Like after cutting the wire and cutting underneath, I end up threading it onto the form with copper wire. So it almost becomes like an embroidery. And I can envision myself at some point having these totally refined enough that it can stop there.
In 2019, Mark's design for Passing the Torch was selected by the Public Art Committee to be the center of Portland's new roundabout at the city's intersection of Brightland and Deering Avenues.
The initial design was for these cut stones, the giant stones, creating a finished interior. That all of the sculpture work happened in the interior, so that there was a center where the action happened, but the outside were all raw and organic. So the sense is that the stones split and the movement happens inside. But each stone would give you a focused view of the next piece, the third piece, so that any 3 times you always had a view of a full piece.
And how did you think of passing the torch?
What I liked about the idea was it's something that we as a culture sometimes neglect. That I think that each generation passes the torch to the next generation. Each person passes the torch of an idea or a spirit or the way they want the world to be to the next, and that's our obligation to pass the torch on. I also wanted to work with flame form. I wanted to work with forms which were not circular, forms that came up to points and sort of did it. I love the concept that came up earlier that I could light them, that they would be a beacon as you came forward, and the whole idea of a beacon. What is a beacon? What is a torch? You know, the fact that a torch is used to light you through dark areas. A torch brings you home at night. You know, our you know, the lights outside of our houses on our front doors were torches before electricity. You know, so that the torch brought you home. And all of those cultural references were interesting. I don't tend to have a lot of cultural references in my personal work. They're more of a dialogue I'm having with myself about forms and experiences. But I thought for a public piece, I needed to find a cultural reference that could appeal to everybody. It's a public piece of work is something we all share. And it's less about me and my experience and more about what we as a community share. And so for me, the symbol of a torch was very resonant. The symbol of a torch meant a lot. And it could appeal to people on many different levels.
The sculpture was installed and unveiled in the fall of 2021.
I got seduced early on by bronze. When I first saw some of the classical bronzes from the few that survived the 2,000 years, a pair of Riace bronzes, a pair of figurative bronzes from Hellenistic Greece were brought up from the bottom of the ocean. I saw them in a museum. And it was that incredible, beautiful, rich texture of years of decay and eating away and patina and dirt and grime, but you get this texture in this surface that is just eloquent. And I loved being able to do that or take the material and take it to a super high shine to the point where it is just liquid gold, you know, like honey, you know. And but to put those two things side by side for me became a very powerful contrast. And bronze is one of the few materials I can do that with. It can be as refined as you need it to be. It can be as gnarly and gritty as you need it to be. What happens, which is interesting, is if you have an idea that you're intrigued with and you make a series of models, and one of those models speaks to you, and you take that one and you take it to the next thing, to the next level, to the next size. When you then finish that piece, in the act of finishing that piece, it will ask you a question that if this piece were bigger, if this came off at a different angle, if the whole piece were stretched like this, what would happen? Well, you can't wait to finish that piece. You put it aside and then you do that one. And then that one will ask you a question. When you finish that one, you put it aside and your next piece has already started in your brain. And that's a process which will last your entire life.